very loving family. And you look at Kelsey looking at Doug, and you see a man looking at another being the way you want to be looked at by somebody who loves him so totally with all his frailties. And at the end of the show, everything blurs, and you're just, this little healing happens, and it's all done completely Jerry Herman-esquely, you know, just in joy and lightness and a lot of love. So our show is finally, I say it's not a revival, it's kind of a revelation now. And that's really odd, isn't it? Isn't it odd that the third time round, it lands?
That's a great quote, boy.
It isn't it? And I haven't told anybody that quote yet. So write it down, write it down, write it down.
We have the sign of a bus tomorrow.
But it is, and people are so touched and really happy, and they leave it lightens, the whole theater is lightened. And that's really, you know, that's what I'm in the game for now, that I'm a more mature and hopefully somewhat more intelligent actor, is that I want to fill the theater with a lot more lightness because the world is so freaking heavy now. So that's a great thing, to let everybody leave lighter. And we're doing that, and I'm really happy about that.
Thank you. That's great. Now, to go a little deeper into the process, this is a question for Tom, both Davids and Jeffry. As people on the creative team writing books and lyrics and composing the music and creating choreography, would you please speak to the question of how your discipline drives the meaning in your musicals, how they have to interact with the other elements of the show, because you're doing what you're doing, but it has to work with everything else. Jeffrey, you want to take that?
The most important thing to me is story. Nothing comes before that. And as a choreographer, I don't want anyone doing a step until they know why they're doing it. They know the set of circumstances. The movement that they're doing is somehow integrated in who their character is. And if we have to move and find out who the character is and how the character moves, then that's fine. But I rely solely on, well, first the director, but the text and the lyrics and what's happening. Where has David set, you know, the scene where the song happens, whether it's in kind of a limbo or whether it's in a GI camp. And then I take my cues from the collaborators, but the story and character is what's most important to me. I don't really care about seeing a bunch of people kicking their faces and doing all of these things unless it is for a reason. And that's it.
Tom?
I got a lot of questions about the composition of Next to Normal and the musical styles in the show, and how I would come up, you know, what my original vision was, and how the process went. And you know, I say the same thing, which is that Brian and I knew that we wanted to write a show that had rock music in it. We felt like the energy of what we were doing was coming from Tommy and Rent specifically, but certainly we were telling a story of emotional angst, and we felt like rock music was going to be a really wonderful way to do that. But I didn't just want to write rock music for the sake of writing rock music. I wanted to write music that felt like it was appropriate to every dramatic moment I was writing for. So in the score, there are other musical elements. There's waltz, there's jazz, and then there's just, you know, theatrical music. And so for me, it was always the dramatic beat leading the way. And that comes from, as Jeffrey was saying, from story and collaboration, you know, working with Brian. And when you're a songwriting team, you'll often get the question about what comes first, the music or the lyrics. And the truth of the matter is that with Brian and I, it was 50-50. There were moments that we just knew he had to go away and figure out and write lyrics for that I would then set. And vice versa, I would have a really, really great melodic sense of what I wanted the moment to sound like. But it's all about collaboration and allowing people's ideas to really percolate and take you in a direction that maybe you didn't think you were going to go, and you're pleasantly surprised. And there were moments where Brian and I did come to heads about things where I thought, no, it has to be this, and you see their way through, and you have this beautiful surprise. So I think you just want to always be able to be surprised by your collaborators and by the story, and follow it and be true to it, and not set out to do anything that doesn't exist in the show that you're writing.
Yeah. Now the two guys who actually write the books that everybody else is following.
No, but I completely agree with that, because that notion of what is on stage is a result of millions and millions and millions of discussions. They go on forever. Every second that's in a musical is a result of days of discussions, and it goes on forever. And someday you work and it's that old, famous saying, you just replace a comma and then you take it out at the end of the day.
Right.
That is what we do. But what you do start with, though, is that research, as a writer, as the book writer, your responsibility is to really understand what the structure is and what the situation is and who those characters are and who they are. In the Scottsboro Boys, we had a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of material that exists about the case, about the boys, things that have been written. So on one hand, you have to be truthful to what's there. You have to be truthful to what's there, but then you also have to make it dramatic, which sometimes aren't the same thing. So it's finding a way to bring that to life. But at the end of the day, though, you have to be able to turn it over. You have to bring it to the discussion and then turn it over to the different departments and let them take it where they need to take it. But still always have a very clear direction of what is it that has to come to life. But it is crazy, though. You see an actor all of a sudden read a line and you go, yeah. They go, did you mean it this way? And you go, yeah, I did, absolutely. Always.
You're talking about me.
Just exactly right. Yeah, that would be you. But anyway, so that's the exciting part. But it does start with having the responsibility of knowing the story and the characters and then help bring it to life. Because as we all know, our stuff gets eaten up in a second by a good song. So, and you always have to turn it over to the composer.
It's certainly hard. It's hard to write a book when I don't write the lyrics because they do get cannibalized, and then you get really sad when your best line becomes a lyric, and then you don't get the credit for that. And it's what do they say? The book is the first thing blamed, last thing praised. So it can be it's sort of an honorable profession to just be a book writer, but it's rarely truly understood. I don't. There's so many ways I can answer that. Joe and I tend to start from story, and we care about that more than anything. I'm fanatical about research. I have this sort of mystical sense that an audience knows. They just somehow know how hard you've worked. And there's an interrogation scene in Act 2 of Yank where the lead gets arrested, and every line in it is actually taken from an interrogation that I found. And that's not like a production note. No one knows that. But I have to have this belief that somehow the audience feels the authenticity of that. And, with lyrics, I feel like I've heard songs that I love, and then I'm like, I wish they just worked half an hour more on that lyric. And I just, do you ever, you hear a rhyme, and you're just like, I just know if you spent 2 more hours, you have a great song there. So I feel like audiences know, and they have on some level they sense if they're in good hands, and if they're with people who have really cared and really risked themselves somehow. And I feel like, again, like when I saw Long Day's Journey into Night, the recent revival, you just knew what it cost O'Neill to write that. It just seemed imprinted on the words. And so I feel like that's the challenge, to risk yourself and imprint yourself so deeply on the words that the audience just knows. They just know. So
Very good, thank you. Now, taking it to the actors, and Jeffrey, you had 2 roles here because you're an actor in the show. In addition to being the physical conduit for the writer, director, choreographer to get the message across, how much input do you generally have, would like to have, in shaping your performance once you're in one of these shows? What have you been able to do to put your own stamp on it?
Well, for me that's interesting because usually I did a lot of revivals when I first came into New York, and that's when revivals were first being done. So, My Fair Lady was the first time it had been done in 20 years, Oklahoma, and I did On Your Toes, Rodgers and Hart's On Your Toes. But especially Fair Lady, everybody thought Julie, and, I'd never really thought about the influence I wanted to have, I'll be honest. And I certainly
you were, what, 19 when you?
Well, I was a child. But, and I had a certain arrogance because I was very insecure. In fact, those backstage breakdowns where they say a certain type, they had Andreas type, arrogant but vulnerable. So I do not know what kind of impression I made in those days, honestly, but I do remember that my loving of it was so extreme. I loved all those women. You know, I loved all those shows, and every show I find myself